What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to break down my top 36 running backs for week 13 of fantasy football. You guys indicated to us that you prefer this format, so we're sticking with it. Going through my running back rankings tier by tier, elite RB1s, RB2s, high-end RB3s, last-ditch flexes, and all that good stuff. We're going to be going through these running backs, who's playing, who's going to be out, and I'll cover all of the usage, all the trends, all the matchup-related stuff as usual. So if you guys find some value from this video, if you feel like it helped you out with your lineup decisions, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and leave any of your start set comments down below. I'll get to as many as I possibly can. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so here is the matchup chart for week 13. You guys can see that we do have Deontay Foreman and James Conner on bye with those two teams out. Some of the more difficult matchups are Jeff Wilson, Kenneth Walker, Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary, who played on Thursday, Saquon Barkley, and some others. And then some of the more easy matchups we have for Dameon Pierce, the Browns running backs, Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, and David Montgomery, etc. But let's start it off with the will they play tier. So I'm just going to break down a couple guys whose statuses are up in question. There's definitely a couple more guys that statuses are up in question, but these are the main ones that popped up throughout the week on injury reports. The first guy is Antonio Gibson. He was downgraded to a do not practice on Thursday, practiced in a limited capacity today as of Friday as I'm recording this. Antonio Gibson is listed as questionable for Sunday's game against the New York Giants, but definitely something to monitor. Obviously, Brian Robinson would see a big time uptick if he's out, and if Gibson plays, they're both kind of in that high-end RB3, low-end RB2 type of range. Leonard Fournette was out last week, and that led to Rachaad White getting the full workhorse role, but he has practiced in full each of the last 2 days going into Sunday or Monday night's game versus the New Orleans Saints. He's probably going to play, if I had to guess, as a Bucs fan. Looks like he should be back, and that muddies up the committee between him and Rachaad White. And then finally, we have Raheem Mostert, who practiced in a limited fashion Wednesday and Thursday. He said he's going to play, not listed on the final injury report heading into the game, so he should be back. But I do have it set up in a way that I don't have him ranked quite yet. But if he is back for this game, he should be a high-end RB3 himself. So let's start off with the elite RB1 tier. I'm not going to spend too much time on these guys outside of, matchup details, because I'm sure you guys know that you should be starting them. But the first guy I have as RB1 for me on the week is Austin Ekeler, who is currently -1 favorites, are the Los Angeles Chargers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. 50.5 point over under, 74% of the money is on the over in this game. Austin Ekeler has been outrageous from a target share perspective. He has double-digit targets in 4 of his last 6 games, which is an absolutely absurd number for a running back. And by double-digit targets, I mean like 14, 15, not like 10 or 11. The Raiders are a very easy matchup. He should be able to get things done on the ground and through the air. Second most adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. It's pretty easy RB1 for me this week. Easy matchup, elite workload. Chargers offense playing a little bit better as well. Moving on to the RB2 for the week, it is Christian McCaffrey. San Francisco is a 4-point favorite against the Dolphins at home this week. 46.5 point over catching 74% of the steam. He's supposedly expected to be a full go for this week's game, according to Kyle Shanahan and some of the reports that we've heard already. Elijah Mitchell's season came to an abrupt end pretty fast after just a couple games. He is going to be out for the rest of the regular season, at least the fantasy football season. This matchup is generally tougher against the run than it is against the pass. The Miami Dolphins are much more of the type of defense that you want to pass against, but that obviously favors Christian McCaffrey as well, because we know he can do it through the air and on the ground. This is the type of usage that we can expect to see, I'd imagine, without Elijah Mitchell out there in the lineup. We saw Christian McCaffrey back in week 8 get an 81% snap share, 75% of the carries, 69% route participation, get all long down and distance snaps, all of the inside the 5 work, all that good stuff. They've talked about using Jordan Mason a little bit more than they were previously using him in the past, now that Elijah Mitchell is out. But I do expect Christian McCaffrey to probably dominate the snaps overall. Moving on to the RB3 of the week, it is Josh Jacobs. Obviously, that same game against the Chargers, they're 1-point dogs, 50.5 point over under, 74% of the cash on the over. Josh Jacobs coming off of an all-timer type of week last week. He walks into a very easy matchup against the Chargers defense. Bottom 5 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Bottom 5 in run defense DVOA. Bottom 5 in PFF run defense grade. 5.63 yards per carry is what they're allowing to opposing fantasy running backs. So big game in store for Josh Jacobs. RB4 on the week for me is Derrick Henry. You guys can see the matchup details on the screen there. Might not seem like it because the Eagles are just generally a good defense, but they are actually quite an easy matchup for fantasy running backs. Top 10 overall in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position, 24th in rush defense DVOA. Derrick Henry is how the Titans win this game. I think they're going to stick to the ground game and try and feed him a ton of carries, 20 plus carries easily in this game coming for Derrick Henry. So he is my RB4 on the week. RB5 on the week is Jonathan Taylor. Colts are pretty heavy underdogs against the Cowboys, 10.5 points, 44.5 point over under, 93% of the cash is on the over in that game. The Cowboys will not be easy to run against. They're a pretty stout run defense overall, but we have seen them, give it up a little bit to the Packers running backs in recent weeks, just like the Steelers did last week for Jonathan Taylor. It is going to be tough sledding for him, though. Something to monitor with Jonathan Taylor's workload is in week 10, since he's been without Nyheim Hines for the last couple of weeks, we have seen that under this new staff with Jeff Saturday, he's getting an every down workload. And then randomly in week 11 against the Eagles, they put Deion Jackson in on 2-minute drill and long down and distance work. But then last week, he was back up to that 92% snap share, getting everything under the sun as far as his workload is concerned. So if he does get this kind of elite workload that we've seen from him in 2 of his last 3 games, then despite the matchup, I'm still starting him as a top 5 running back against the Cowboys. And then finally, to close out this elite running backs tier, we have Nick Chubb. Cleveland is facing the revenge game. Deshaun Watson is making his first start against the Houston Texans, who are one of the easiest running back matchups in the league right now. They are absolutely terrible against the run. ECR actually has Nick Chubb is RB2 on the week. I believe that's fair considering the matchup, but I do favor the workloads of the guys that I have ranked ahead of him. But against Houston, who ranks 31st in my matchup chart, no questions asked, Nick Chubb could be in for a big time matchup with Deshaun Watson. Like I said, we'll see what he looks like in his first start, but I'd have to imagine it probably equals an uptick for these Cleveland Browns passing offense, and that means more goal line opportunities for Nick Chubb. So moving on to the next tier, we have the RB1 tier, and Travis Etienne, my RB7 on the week, the first guy that we're going to talk about. 51 point over under in this game. Definitely interesting to see. Travis Etienne left early last week, but I'm expecting him to play this week. He's come out and said he's going to play. Doug Peterson's come out and said he's going to play, according to Ian Rappaport and those type of guys. He is going to play. So apparently he could have came back into the game, even though he was dealing with a foot injury last week, but they wanted to play it safe with him. Probably pretty smart. Lions are the 22nd matchup in my matchup chart against the run, so I expect a big time game out of Travis Etienne. He might actually get his first long touchdown of the week as well. RB8 on the week is Ramondre Stevenson, who already played last night. Didn't find the end zone, but 14 PPR points. And what I would consider a game more reminiscent of his floor is probably not a bad output for those of you guys on Thursday night, although you probably would have wanted more out of him. RB9 on the week for me is Aaron Jones. Green Bay is 3.5 point favorites against the Bears this week, 44.5 point over under. This could be a bonkers Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon game, in my opinion. The Bears have been absolutely awful on defense in general, but especially against the run. Since they traded Roquan Smith, since they traded Robert Quinn away, 28.0 PPR points per game allowed to fantasy football running backs the last 5 games. They just allowed the Jets' backup running backs to run all over them. Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson were able to decimate them last week. What are the Green Bay Packers running backs going to do to this Bears defense? I think it could be a big-time game for Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. RB10 on the week is Joe Mixon, pending his health. We don't know exactly if he's going to be back this week. He is expected to be cleared from the concussion protocol, but it is Friday as I'm recording this, and he hasn't been cleared yet, hasn't practiced more than a limited capacity all week. The Bengals offense could see a big boost this week, though, with Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase both being back into the lineup. We presume 53 point over under in a matchup against the Chiefs, where the Bengals have performed well in the past. Concussions don't typically result in a smaller workload. So even if Joe Mixon is just, cleared at the buzzer on Saturday afternoon or something, I would imagine that he's going to get his full workload. But if he's out, then you fire up Samaje Perine as a top 15 option. So moving on to the RB11, which is Saquon Barkley. Giants against Commanders, only a 40 point over under in this game. A lot of steam actually catching on the under. Saquon Barkley has been objectively bad the past couple games. He's had some tough matchups last week against the Dallas Cowboys, but he also had some easy matchups against the Detroit Lions. He had 10 days off, so if he's dealing with like an injury or something, he should be back to full go. Things really fell off for him, though, after that 36 touch performance a couple weeks ago against Houston in week 10. Maybe he needed some rest. Who knows? But either way, you're firing up Saquon Barkley as a top 12 running back. The Commanders are a pretty tough matchup against the run, though, so maybe not a huge Saquon game incoming. RB12 for me on the week is Kenneth Walker. The Rams Seahawks game, not a high over under expected 40.5 points. Really brutal matchup for Kenneth Walker as well. Second worst in my matchup chart. Two brutal games in a row for him against the Bucks and the Raiders efficiency wise. He probably should have been a lot better last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Rams will be without Aaron Donald by the sounds of it though in this game. So I'm trusting the guy that I saw earlier in the season with Kenneth Walker. He was really good for the most part. He's just had a couple down games in a row, and I think he can get back on track. RB13 for me on the week closing out this tier is Dalvin Cook. The Vikings are 3-point favorites against the Jets this week, 44.5 point over under, and a lot of the money, 99% of it, on the over in this game. So the Sharps think that this game is probably going to be higher scoring than people think. Point total is getting a lot of steam, but the Jets are a stout defense against both the run and against the pass, top 6 against the run. And we've seen when Dalvin Cook has probably had his worst games of the year so far. 4 of his games under 50 yards usually have come against stout run defenses. So I'm not expecting a ton of efficiency out of Dalvin Cook. Maybe he can break off a long one. But overall, he should have a good opportunity to get in the end zone. We know his workload's pretty secure and so on and so forth. So moving on to the next tier of running backs we have is the RB2s for the week. We have Alvin Kamara, Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, David Montgomery, Jeff Wilson Jr., and Cordero Patterson in this tier. RB14 for me is Alvin Kamara. As I mentioned, the Saints play the Bucks on Monday night. They are 3.5-point dogs to the Buccaneers, even though they are struggling. Kamara has seen less than 14 touches in 3 of his last 4 games, which is kind of concerning why they're not using Alvin Kamara more. And the Bucks, as we know, are generally speaking a tough matchup for fantasy running backs. Bottom 7 matchup in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. Alvin Kamara's got some easy ones coming in the playoffs, but he's had a tough schedule the last couple games, facing a gauntlet of Pittsburgh Steelers, Los Angeles Rams, San Francisco 49ers, and now he plays the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Probably not going to have another good game this week. I do have him ranked this high given the pedigree, given what we know Alvin Kamara can do if he's actually given some opportunities. RB15 for me on the week is Dameon Pierce. The Texans, like I said, playing a revenge game against the Cleveland Browns. They are 7-point underdogs to the Cleveland Browns, so we don't know exactly if Dameon Pierce is going to be another victim of game script, as he's been against the Dolphins last week and against the Commanders 2 weeks ago. The Dameon Pierce show has come to a bit of a screaming halt because of those game script issues that we kind of worried about Dameon Pierce earlier on in the season. But this is a meaningful game for the Texans. This is kind of like a revenge game. They probably want to beat their old quarterback with Deshaun Watson returning. And it's the single easiest matchup in the NFL for fantasy running backs, which also helps. Dameon Pierce is my easiest matchup according to my matchup chart. The Browns are terrible against the run. Rachaad White was able to get things done to them last week. And speaking of Rachaad White, he is my RB16 on the week. He faces the Saints on Monday night. He's ranked at 16 for me here, under the assumption that Fournette is probably going to play, but will be scaled back a little bit in terms of his workload. I expect Rachaad White to still lead the backfield in touches, in carries, and targets, and all that stuff. But I do expect Leonard Fournette to play. I do expect Leonard Fournette to eat into his workload a little bit. The Saints defense is about middle of the road against the run, so I'm not overly concerned about Rachaad White's efficiency. As long as he's getting the workload, he should be fine. The Bucks are struggling big time on offense, though, so maybe a jolt of their division rival, the New Orleans Saints. Happy fuck the Saints week, by the way. I'm a Tampa Bay fan, and I haven't said that so far this week. If they play against the Saints very well, then we might see this offense start to take a step forward down the stretch. But I feel like I've been waiting that for a couple weeks now. They might just be what they are at this point in time. So RB17 on the week for me is David Montgomery. Like I said, Bears are underdogs to the Packers this week. 27th easiest matchup, though, for David Montgomery, according to my matchup chart against the Green Bay Packers. And it looks like David Montgomery will be getting Justin Fields back as well. And knowing that this team can't stop the run, it helps to have their mobile quarterback in there. The Bears offense was really, really bad with Justin Fields out. Trevor Siemian's going to be out for the rest of the year. So I'd imagine also, even if Justin Fields doesn't play, which it looks like he will, he's off the injury report, no problem. Their backup situation not looking great. So hopefully Justin Fields can stay healthy for the rest of the year for the sake of David Montgomery. That should make a big time difference. We've seen what his workload has been since Khalil Herbert has been out of the lineup. He pretty much gets everything under the sun, all the routes, all the targets, all the carries, all the goal line work, all that good stuff for David Montgomery. So the final guy of this tier, as I mentioned, was Jeff Wilson Jr. for the Dolphins. They are underdogs to the 49ers this week, but we got another revenge game, Jeff Wilson revenge game, back facing his old team in the San Francisco 49ers. The way that they've been hanging points on people, I really don't care that the 49ers are a great defense and that they stop the run well. I'm still firing Jeff Wilson up because that's how well that this Dolphins offense is playing. They're able to move the ball against anybody that they faced, including some tough defenses. The 49ers are a strong defense. They are the most difficult matchup according to my matchup chart. But honestly, I think Jeff Wilson will be just fine in this game. And Raheem Mostert, if he plays, that downgrades Jeff Wilson a little bit. But I do think both of these guys can be, top 30 running backs given the high scoring nature I expect in this game. So and the final guy of this RB2 tier is actually Cordarrelle Patterson, who we saw last week. We saw Cordarrelle Patterson get back up to his former usage profile. Over the last 2 games, we've seen him ramped back up since the knee injury that kept him out for a couple games. He's not going to ever be a 20 carry per game type of running back, but he does get a lot of valuable touches. He gets schemed open, he gets targets, all that good stuff. So he is an RB2 for me, despite playing a tough Pittsburgh defense. But we can move on to the high-end RB3 territory here, which is where we're looking at guys like DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard, Jamaal Williams, Miles Sanders, Isaiah Pacheco, Devin Singletary, who played on Thursday night, Zonovan Knight, assuming Michael Carter is out, Najee Harris, assuming he plays, and Brian Robinson here as well. RB20 for me, like I said, is DeAndre Swift. Swift finally saw something positive heading his way on Thanksgiving. He was able to regain the long down and distance work, the 2-minute drill work, the third down work for this Lions offense, which we know is pretty valuable because they're playing from behind quite a bit. And he saw 8 targets in their loss to the Buffalo Bills. He also simultaneously left Jamaal Williams on the bench more often than we were used to seeing, only a 40% snap share for him. So I know it's a bit of a dicey situation. It's a split backfield, but it's a solid matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So both of those guys are inside my top 24 for me. RB21 on the week for me is Tony Pollard. I wouldn't blame you at all if you wanted to start him over DeAndre Swift. We saw probably the type of split that we're going to see for the rest of the season with Zeke and with Pollard. I expect Tony Pollard to outsnap Zeke slightly the way he did last week, 59% to 51%. But I still think Zeke is going to be there to vulture those short down and distance work, that inside the 5 goal line carry type of work, because it seems like they found a good balance between these two guys. You use Tony Pollard in the receiving game, you use him on the explosive carries, and bring in Ezekiel Elliott for the dirty carries, the 3rd and 1s, the first and goals, all that kind of stuff. So tough matchup on the ground for the Cowboys against a top 12 Colts run defense. Maybe Pollard can get there through the air, so I have him as my RB21. Like I mentioned, RB22 for me is Jamaal Williams. Even though Swift is more involved in the passing game, and these are PPR rankings, Williams is still a top 24 back because of how much they run the ball in the red zone, how many touchdowns he scored this year. And like I said, this is a pretty solid matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So moving on to RB23, we have Miles Sanders. Like I said, Sanders is coming off of his biggest performance of the year. He had a 30 PPR point performance, but his role didn't change all that much. He pretty much had the same role he's had all season, except those big plays, the touchdowns, the receiving work all kind of went his way in this matchup. Top 3 toughest matchup versus the Titans run defense currently right now, but we know the Eagles can move the ball on offense, and the Titans have typically allowed teams to pass on them. So if we know that the Eagles are going to move the ball, get into the red zone, that leaves touchdown opportunities on the table for Miles Sanders. Closing out the top 24 running backs, we have Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. Like I said, big time over under in this game, 53 points. We kind of know what Pacheco's role is by now. Even though they brought in Melvin Gordon, I still expect Isaiah Pacheco to be the primary ball carrier, the primary grinder for this offense, and he gets opportunities in the red zone given that he plays for Kansas City. This game has a super high over under in this one, so I'd be fine if you wanted to start Isaiah Pacheco over some of the names that I already talked about, over Swift, over Williams, over Tony Pollard, just given that we know what his workload is. He's completely touchdown or bust, but he could definitely work out for you. RB25, as I mentioned, already played on Thursday night against the New England Patriots with Devin Singletary. Played last night, and he found the end zone, so no problems there. RB26 for me is Zonovan Knight, and we saw Bam Knight get most of the work when Michael Carter was out. We now have official word that Michael Carter is doubtful for this game, probably not going to play. So Zonovan Knight, I expect to be the primary ball carrier, 55-60% of the touches, and then the rest go into Ty Johnson. So I actually like him as a top 30 running back against the Vikings in this game. Over in this one is also getting a lot of the steam, 44.5 point over under with 99% of the money on the over. So I expect Zonovan Knight to probably get a good workload in this one. RB27 for me is Najee Harris. Falcons are 1-point dogs to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Najee Harris came out basically and said that he's going to play despite not really practicing a ton this week. He didn't practice Wednesday, he didn't practice Thursday, but he did practice in a limited capacity today, and he basically came out and said, I'm going to play, but if he's out for whatever reason, Jaylen Warren would hop right into this spot as a top 30 running back play. And you could maybe make the argument that Najee Harris should be pushed up a little bit higher, but I'm still worried about the split between him and Jaylen Warren because both of them are now going to play in this matchup. So moving on to the RB28, closing out this tier, we have Brian Robinson in the game against the Giants this week. We really don't know what Antonio Gibson's status is quite yet because, like I said, on Thursday he didn't practice. On Friday he was a limited practice. or limited participant in practice. And Brian Robinson, despite having 100 rushing yards last week and having his best game of the season, it was just his first game of over 3.8 yards per carry. He was playing against the Falcons. Pretty much everybody does that against the Falcons, and he still only played 48% of the snaps. Gibson was still heavily involved. So I'm not quite ready to throw Brian Robinson, all the way up there quite yet, especially in a tougher matchup against the New York Giants with Gibson potentially playing. So Brian Robinson, a fine high-end RB3. Gibson would be probably ranked around this range as well if I knew he was playing. So moving on to the final tier of the video, these are your last-ditch flexes. These are the guys that, if you have a bye week, if you have James Conner out, if you have D'Onta Foreman out or something, you could throw these guys into your lineup, and I wouldn't bat an eye. Or if you have some injuries at wide receiver and you need them in your flexes as well, A.J. Dillon, Latavius Murray, Ezekiel Elliott, Gus Edwards, Kyron Williams, Tyler Algier, and Kareem Hunt. RB29, A.J. Dillon. I'm just going to speed through these last minute. A.J. Dillon's got an easy matchup against the Bears. The Packers are favored. Rodgers is expected to play, so he's not a bad flex option. Latavius Murray. Mike Boone may be active for this game coming off of IR, but Latavius Murray is a fine volume play. Even though he plays for the shitty Devin Broncos, he is going to get volume. He has opportunities at touchdowns. RB31, Ezekiel Elliott, just hope he falls his fat ass into the end zone. RB32, Gus Edwards. He returned to the Ravens lineup last week, and he saw 50% of the carries, 50% of the snaps. He's a fine touchdown or bust type of RB3 this week in a matchup against the Broncos where they are more than a touchdown favorite. RB33 for me here is Kyron Williams, and he commanded 71% of the snaps last week and is seeing decent receiving work for the Rams. They are the most unwatchable offense in the NFL right now, but he's strictly a volume play because he's getting a decent workload. RB34, we have Tyler Algier. Maybe he sees about 15 touches a game and he has a shot at a touchdown, but that's pretty much about it. RB35, Kareem Hunt. Maybe they use him more with Watson back. Maybe they don't. Who knows? But it's a very, very easy matchup against the Houston Texans. So even if he only gets 10 to 15 touches, he should be very, very efficient. Like I said, Leonard Fournette, Antonio Gibson, Raheem Mostert, they would all work themselves into that high-end RB3 range, as I mentioned. But this is the end of the video. Leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new around here as well. Comment down below any of your start-sit questions, running back-wise, wide receiver-wise, whatever position you need. I'm happy to help you out over there. And if you guys want to check out more of our dynasty content, more of our redraft content, all that kind of stuff is available over on patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. So if you want to check that out, go give it a click down below. Link is in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?